Now, the Chartered Financial Analyst is a highly sought-after qualification among financial advisors and investment professionals. Globally, it is managed by the CFA Institute, who has just appointed Paul Smith as its new CEO. He's at the JSE with Gunther, who will get his thoughts on how desirable South Africa is as an investment destination. Gunther.
Thank you, Devin. Yes, Mr. Paul Smith is with me. He's Chief Executive Officer of the CFA Institute. So let's get on with it. Welcome, sir.
Welcome. Thank you.
First question is, let's get straight to the point. Why invest in South Africa and why not? So basically two in one.
Okay, two in one. Well, why? Obviously, it's a young, fast-growing emerging market, and therefore a lot of our members and the companies that they work for are very interested in South Africa from that reason alone. Why not? I suppose just as obvious to anyone who's a frequent visitor to South Africa, as well as to the people who live here, that there is still issues with your power grid, for instance, with the political situation here, and those are the drawbacks, I think, that most people see when they think about South Africa as an investment destination.
You've traveled extensively across the globe and seen various jurisdictions to invest in. If you were to rank us amongst our peers.
Right. It's tough. I mean, I wouldn't have a number in mind, but I would say, I mean, play safe. I'd go for the middle of the pack, I suppose, as far as emerging market destinations are concerned. The mix. I mean, obviously, the thing that strikes you most about South Africa, particularly if you haven't been a frequent visitor here, is just how wonderful the basic core infrastructure is, and that is unusual. So you have an awful lot to build on and to play with, but I think some of the political situation here is not as favourable as it would be perhaps in some other countries.
Yes.
The level of educational attainment of the country as a whole is also, I think, a little lower than you would find in Asia, for instance, which is where I happen to live. I live in Hong Kong. So I think when you take infrastructure better, education perhaps poorer. So I think the mix of those two things together would place it in the middle of the pack.
Something that at least is a bit of a political hot potato seems to be how ratings agencies treat us.
Right.
I suppose everyone has that same complaint.
Well, the rating agencies. I'm very grateful that rating agencies exist because they're sort of trusted less than my profession, the investment management world. So it's always good to have another whipping boy out there that's less trusted than you are. I think the rating agencies do. Having said that, I think they do a reasonable job. I'm not overly familiar with the way that they treat South Africa as far as your overall investment grading rating goes. But they have their methodology, and I think South Africa has to learn, perhaps at a government level, to play that game a little bit better. If ratings are important to you, which obviously they are in terms of bringing the cost of your debt financing down, then there are ways of approaching those rating agencies to make sure that you manage that rating successfully. And perhaps there's a political message in there that needs to be taken to heart.
When you listen to global colleagues, what is the impression that you get of what they think of South Africa as a destination, of course, for investment? Is it hands-off, or is it treat with kid gloves, or is it let's go for it?
I think it's so hard to generalize. I mean, I think people who know South Africa well would be let's go for it, because you have wonderful, as I say, you have wonderful core infrastructure. You have some highly educated professionals and some wonderful financial services infrastructure here. So there's plenty to play with. If you don't know South Africa very well and you come here, I think perhaps you see some more of the negatives than you do of the positives. The security situation, for instance, particularly if you're here in Johannesburg, things like that tend to drag you down a little bit. So I think the reaction to South Africa depends on how familiar you are with the country, how good your connections are here. And so when I talk to people around the world about South Africa, I get a very mixed bag of opinions, and it really does depend on how well they know the country.
It sounds just about like everywhere else, but tell me, do we do enough locally, especially from investment professionals' perspective, to promote South Africa as a destination?
I don't think so, personally. I think that's a very good question, Gunther. I mean, I think South Africa has had quite an insular mentality as far as its own stock markets go. That never used to be the case going back 40, 50 years, but it has become so, I think, in the post-apartheid era. And I think that's something that does need to be thought through a little bit from the financial services professionals here. I don't see South Africans reaching out quite as much as they did in the 70s and 80s, for instance, which unfortunately I'm old enough to remember. But I think over the last decade or two, I think that's a good point. I think South Africa could do a better job of promoting itself.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Great pleasure.
Paul Smith, CEO of the CFA Institute, and as you heard, there's a lot more we can do to promote ourselves. So put on a smile. Let's have a break.